Senator Sanders, your opening statement, sir.
Thank you. As we honor the extraordinary life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., it's important not only that we remember what he stood for, but that we pledge to continue his vision to transform our country. And as we look out at our country today, what the American people understand is we have an economy that's rigged, that ordinary Americans are working longer hours for lower wages, 47 million people living in poverty, and almost all of the new income and wealth going to the top 1%. And then, to make a bad situation worse, we have a corrupt campaign finance system where millionaires and billionaires are spending extraordinary amounts of money to buy elections. This campaign is about a political revolution to not only elect the president, but to transform this country.
Senator, thank you. All right, to our first question now. The first question I'll be addressing to all of the candidates. President Obama came to office determined to swing for the fences on health care reform. Voters want to know how you would define your presidency. How would you think big? So complete this sentence. In my first 100 days in office, my top 3 priorities will be, fill in the blank. Senator Sanders.
Well, that's what our campaign is about. It is thinking big. It is understanding that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we should have health care for every man, woman, and child as a right, that we should raise the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour, that we have got to create millions of decent-paying jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. So what my first days are about is bringing America together to end the decline of the middle class, to tell the wealthiest people in this country that, yes, they are going to start paying their fair share of taxes, and that we are going to have a government that works for all of us and not just big campaign contributors.
So the last couple of weeks of this campaign have featured some of the sharpest exchanges in the race. Let's start with one of them, the issue of guns. Senator Sanders, last week Secretary Clinton called you, quote, a pretty reliable vote for the gun lobby. Right before the debate, you changed your position on immunity from lawsuits for gun manufacturers. Can you tell us why?
Well, I think Secretary Clinton knows that what she says is very disingenuous. I have a D- voting record from the NRA. I was in 1988. There were 3 candidates running for Congress in the state of Vermont. I stood up to the gun lobby and came out and maintained the position that in this country we should not be selling military-style assault weapons. I have supported from day one an instant background check to make certain that people who should not have guns do not have guns, and that includes people with criminal backgrounds, people who are mentally unstable. I support what President Obama is doing in terms of trying to close the gun show loopholes, and I think it should be a federal crime if people act as straw men. We have seen in this city a horrendous tragedy of a crazed person praying with people and coming out and shooting 9 people. This should not be a political issue. What we should be doing is working together. And by the way, as a senator from a rural state that has virtually no gun control, I believe that I am in an excellent position to bring people together
Senator,
to fight for sensible gun safety
legislation. But you didn't answer the question that you did change your position on immunity for gun manufacturers. So can you answer the question as to why?
What I have said is that the gun manufacturer's liability bill had some good provisions. Among other things, we prohibited ammunition that would have killed cops who had protection on. We had child safety protection on guns in that legislation. And what we also said is a small mom-and-pop gun shop who sells a gun legally to somebody should not be held liable if somebody does something terrible with that gun. So what I said is I would relook at it. We are going to relook at it, and I will support stronger provisions.
Secretary Clinton, would you like to Senator Sanders? My next question is actually my next question is for you.
To what the Secretary said. We have a criminal justice system which is broken. Who in America is satisfied that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, disproportionately African American and Latino? Who is satisfied that 51% of African American young people are either unemployed or underemployed? Who is satisfied that millions of people have police records for possessing marijuana when the CEOs of Wall Street companies who destroyed our economy have no police records?
Senator Sanders.
So we need to take a very hard look at our criminal justice system, investing in jobs and education, not in jails and incarceration.
Just over a week ago, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus endorsed Secretary Clinton, not you. He said that choosing her over you was not a hard decision. In fact, our polling shows she's beating you more than 2-to-1 among minority voters. How can you be the nominee if you don't have that support?
Well, let me talk about polling. As Secretary Clinton well knows, when this campaign began, she was 50 points ahead of me. We were all of 3 percentage points. Guess what? In Iowa, New Hampshire, the race is very, very close. Maybe we're ahead in New Hampshire. In terms of polling, guess what? We are running ahead of Secretary Clinton in terms of taking on my good friend Donald Trump, beating him by 19 points in New Hampshire, 13 points in the last national poll that I saw. To answer your question, when the African American community becomes familiar with my congressional record and with our agenda and with our views on the economy and criminal justice, just as the general population has become more supportive, so will the African American community, so will the Latino community. We have the momentum. We're on a path toward victory.
Google's, actually, Governor, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Google searches for the let's talk more about policing and the criminal justice system. Senator Sanders, a few times tonight we're going to hear from some of the most prominent voices on YouTube, starting with Francesca Ramsey, who tackles racial stereotypes through her videos. Let's watch.
Hey, I'm Francesca Ramsey. I believe there's a huge conflict of interest when local prosecutors investigate cases of police violence within their own communities. For example, last month, the officers involved in the case of 12-year-old Tamir Rice weren't indicted. How would your presidency ensure that incidents of police violence are investigated and prosecuted fairly?
Senator Sanders.
I apologize for not hearing all of that question.
Would you like me to read it back to you?
Yeah.
Prosecutors, I believe there's a huge conflict of interest when local prosecutors investigate cases of police violence within their communities. Most recently, we saw this with the non-indictment of the officers involved in the case of 12-year-old Tamir Rice. Right. How would your presidency ensure incidents of police violence are investigated and prosecuted fairly?
This is a responsibility for the U.S. Justice Department to get involved. Whenever anybody in this country is killed while in police custody, this should automatically trigger a U.S. Attorney General's investigation. Second of all, and I speak as a mayor who worked very closely and well with police officers, the vast majority of whom are honest, hardworking people trying to do a difficult job. But let us be clear. If a police officer breaks the law, like any public official, that officer must be held accountable. And thirdly, we have got to demilitarize our police departments so they don't look like occupying armies. We got to move toward community policing. And fourthly, we have got to make our police departments look like the communities they serve in their diversity.
Senator Sanders, would you like to respond?
Sure. I agree with everything the Secretary said, but let me just add this. There is a responsibility on the part of the pharmaceutical industry and the drug companies who are producing all of these drugs and not looking at the consequence of it. And second of all, when we talk about addiction being a disease, the Secretary is right. What that means is we need a revolution in this country in terms of mental health treatment. People should be able to get the treatment that they need when they need it, not 2 months from now, which is why I believe in universal health care with mental health.
Time. We're going to get into all that.
Okay.
Senator Sanders.
Secretary Clinton didn't answer your question. Because what her campaign was saying, Bernie Sanders, who has fought for universal health care for my entire life, he wants to end Medicare, end Medicaid, end the Children's Health Insurance Program. That is nonsense. What a Medicare for All program does is finally provide in this country health care for every man, woman, and child as a right. Now, the truth is that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, you know what they believed in? They believed that health care should be available to all of our people. I'm on the committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act. I made the Affordable Care Act, along with Jim Clyburn, a piece of legislation. I voted for it. But right now, what we have to deal with is the fact that 29 million people still have no health insurance. We are paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, getting ripped off. And here's the important point. We are spending far more per person on health care than the people of any other country. My proposal, provide health care to all people, get private insurance out of health insurance, lower the cost of health care for middle-class families by $5,000. That's the vision we need to take.
Well, if I can, contentious debate, I think is the wrong direction.
I have to talk about something that's actually working in our state.
No one is tearing this up. We're going to go forward. But what the Secretary neglected to mention, not just the 29 million still have no health insurance, that even more are underinsured with huge co-payments and deductibles. Tell me why we are spending almost 3 times more than the British, who guarantee health care to all of their people. 50% more than the French, more than the Canadians. The vision from FDR and Harry Truman was health care for all people as a right in a cost-effective way. We're not going to tear up the Affordable Care Act. I helped write it. But we are going to move on top of that to a Medicare for all system.
Andrea, instead of...
Senator Sanders, let me ask you this, though.
Yeah.
You've talked about Medicare for all, and tonight you've released a very detailed plan. Just 2 hours before the debate, you did.
Well,
but let me ask you about Vermont, because in Vermont, you tried in the state of Vermont, and Vermont walked away from this kind of idea of Medicare for all, single payer, because they concluded it would require major tax increases, and by some estimates, it would double the budget. If you couldn't sell it in Vermont,
let me just say that. You might want to ask the governor of the state of Vermont why he could not do it. I'm not the governor. I'm the senator from the state of Vermont. But second of all, here is what the real point is. In terms of all of the issues you've raised, the good questions you've raised, you know what it all comes down to? Do you know why we can't do what every other country, major country on earth is doing? It's because we have a campaign finance system that is corrupt. We have super PACs. We have the pharmaceutical industry pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into campaign contributions and lobbying, and the private insurance companies as well. What this is really about is not the rational way to go forward. It's Medicare for all. It is whether we have the guts to stand up to the private insurance companies and all of their money and the pharmaceutical industry. That's what this debate should be about. Well, a couple of years ago, when we understood that veterans were not getting the quality care they needed in a timely manner, I worked with folks like John McCain and others to pass the most comprehensive veterans health care legislation in modern history. But let me rephrase your question, because I think, if, in all due respect, your expression, in all due respect, you're missing the main point. And the main point in the Congress is not that Republicans and Democrats hate each other. That's a mythology from the media. The real issue is that Congress is owned by big money and refuses to do what the American people want them to do. The real issue is that in area after area, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the American people want it. Rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, creating 13 million jobs, the American people want it. Pay equity for women, the American people want it, demanding that the wealthy start paying their fair share of taxes. The American people want
That's time, but let me continue with you.
We have got to make Congress respond to the needs of the people, not big
Senator Sanders, let me continue. You call yourself a democratic socialist, and throughout your career in politics, you've been critical of the Democratic Party, even saying in a book you wrote, quote, there wasn't a hell of a big difference between the two major parties. How will you win a general election labeling yourself a democratic socialist?
Because what I believe and what I was just saying, the Democratic Party needs major reform. To those of you in South Carolina, you know what, in Mississippi, we need a 50-state strategy so that people in South Carolina and Mississippi can get the resources that they need. Instead of being dependent on super PACs, what we need is to be dependent on small individual campaign contributors. We need an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and low-income people, not wealthy campaign contributors.
Yeah, but
we
Senator,
We need to expand what the input into the Democratic Party. I am very proud that in this campaign we have seen an enormous amount of excitement from young people, from working people. We have received more individual contributions than any candidate in the history of this country up to this point.
This question is for you. Here's another question from...
Disagree with my friend over here, and that is, you are right. All of us have denounced Trump's attempt to divide this country, the anti-Latino rhetoric, the racist rhetoric, the anti-Muslim rhetoric. But where I disagree with you, Governor O'Malley, is I do believe we have to deal with the fundamental issues of a handful of billionaires who control the economic and political life of this country.
I agree.
Nothing real will happen unless we have a political revolution where millions of people finally stand up.
Let's turn now to the economy. Senator Sanders, you released a tough new ad last week in which, without mentioning Secretary Clinton by name, you talk about two Democratic visions for regulating Wall Street. Quote, one says it's okay to take millions from big banks and tell them what to do. My plan, break up the big banks, close the tax loopholes, and make them pay their fair share. What do you see as the difference between what you would do about the banks and what Secretary Clinton would do?
The first difference is I don't take money from big banks. I don't get personal speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. What I would do is understand that when you have 3 out of the 4 largest banks today bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail, when you have the 6 largest financial institutions having assets of 60% of the GDP of America, it is very clear to me what you have to do. You got to bring back a 21st century Glass-Steagall legislation, and you got to break up these huge financial institutions. They have too much economic power, and they have too much financial power over our entire economy. If Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, the old Republican trustbuster, what he would say is, these guys are too powerful, break them up. I believe that's what the American people want to see. That's my view.
Secretary Clinton, help your Sanders' response.
Set the record right. In 2006, when I ran for the Senate, Senator Barack Obama was kind enough to campaign for me. 2008, I did my best to see that he was elected, and in 2012, I worked as hard as I could to see that he was reelected. He and I are friends. We've worked together on many issues. We have some differences of opinion. But here is the issue. Secretary touched on it. Can you really reform Wall Street when they are spending millions and millions of dollars on campaign contributions and when they are providing speaker fees to individuals? So it's easy to say, well, I'm going to do this and do that. But I have doubts when people receive huge amounts of money from Wall Street. I am very proud. I do not have a super PAC. I do not want Wall Street's money. I'll rely on the middle class and working families for my campaign contributions.
Gives the president the authority with his regulators to make those decisions.
How corrupt this system is. Goldman Sachs recently fined $5 billion. Goldman Sachs has given this country 2 secretaries of Treasury, one on the Republicans, one on the Democrats.
Say it.
The leader of Goldman Sachs is a billionaire who comes to Congress and tells us we should cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Secretary Clinton, and you're not the only one, so I don't mean to just point the finger at you. You've received over $600,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs in 1 year. I find it very strange that a major financial institution that pays $5 billion in fines for breaking the law, not one of their executives is prosecuted, while kids who smoke marijuana get a jail sentence.
We need to stop.
Anyone who wants to check my record, anyone who wants to check my record in taking on Wall Street, in fighting against the deregulation of Wall Street, when Wall Street put billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions to get the government off their backs. They got the government off their backs. Turns out that they were crooks and they destroyed our economy. I think it's time to put the government back on their backs.
Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, we've talked a lot about things you want to do. You want free education for everyone. You want the federal minimum wage raised to $15 an hour. You want to expand Social Security benefits. You've been specific about what you want, but let's talk about how to pay for all this. You now said that you would raise taxes today, 2 hours or so ago. You've said you would raise taxes to pay for your health care plan. You haven't been specific about how to pay for the other things. Will you tell us tonight?
Good. You're right. I want to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, create 13 million jobs. We do that by doing away with the absurd loophole that now allows major profitable corporations to stash their money in the Cayman Islands and not in some years pay a nickel in taxes. Yes, I do. I plead guilty. I want every kid in this country who has the ability to be able to go to a public college or university tuition free. And by the way, I want to substantially lower student debt interest rates in this country as well. How do I pay for it? I pay for it through a tax on Wall Street speculation. This country and the middle class bailed out Wall Street. Now it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class. In fact, we have documented, unlike Secretary Clinton, I have documented exactly how I would pay for our ambitious agenda.
Secretary Sanders, let me ask you a question about taxes, because the most Googled political issue in the last month was taxes. Now, in your health care plan, the plan you released tonight, you would not only raise taxes on the wealthy. The details you released indicate you would raise taxes on the middle class also. Is that correct?
What is correct, and I'm disappointed that Secretary Clinton's campaign has made this criticism. It's a Republican criticism. Secretary Clinton does know a lot about health care, and she understands, I believe, that a Medicare for All single-payer program will substantially lower the cost of health care for middle-class families. So what we have got to acknowledge, and I hope the Secretary does, is we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So instead of paying $10,000 to Blue Cross or Blue Shield, yes, some middle-class families would be paying slightly more in taxes, but the result would be that that middle-class family would be saving some $5,000 in health care costs. A little bit more in taxes, do away with private health insurance premiums. It's a pretty good deal.
Senator, let me just follow up on that, because on Meet the Press on December 20th, you said that you would only raise taxes on the middle class to pay for family leave. And having said that, now you say you're going to raise middle-class taxes to pay for health care as well. Is that breaking your word?
No, it is not breaking my word. When you are, it's one thing to say I'm raising taxes. It's another thing to say that we are doing away with private health insurance premiums. So if I save you $10,000 in private health insurance and you pay a little bit more in taxes, in total, there are huge savings in what your family is spending.
Got a lot of ground to cover here. Many Democratic voters are passionate about the need to do something to combat the threat of climate change, including the team of scientists from YouTube's Minute Earth channel. Here's their take.
Hello from Minute Earth. Fossil fuels have long kept our cars moving and our light bulbs lit. But we now know that burning these fuels releases heat-trapping gases that are warming the planet, causing seas to rise and contributing to extreme weather events like South Carolina's devastating flooding last year. Fighting human-caused climate change means giving up our global addiction to fossil fuels and shifting the bulk of the world's energy supply to alternative sources. Some countries have acted decisively to make this transition, but here at home, we still get a whopping 82% of our energy from coal, oil, and natural gas. In the U.S., political gridlock, pressure from industry lobbyists, and insufficient R&D have made an already tough battle against climate change even tougher.
Senator Sanders, Americans love their SUVs, which spiked in sales last year as gas prices plummeted. How do you convince Americans that the problem of climate change is so urgent that they need to change their behavior?
I think we already are. Younger generation understands it instinctively. I was home in Burlington, Vermont on Christmas Eve. The temperature was 65 degrees. People in Vermont know what's going on. People who did ice fishing where their ice is no longer there on the lake understand what's going on. I'm on both the environmental and energy committees. The debate is over. Climate change is real. It is already causing major problems. And if we do not act boldly and decisively, a bad situation will become worse. It is amazing to me, and I think we'll have agreement on this up here, that we have a major party called the Republican Party that is so owned by the fossil fuel industry and their campaign contributions that they don't even have the courage, the decency to listen to the scientists. It is beyond my comprehension how we can elect a president of the United States, somebody like Trump, who believes that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese. Bottom line is, we need to be bold and decisive. We can create millions of jobs. We must, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. I've got the most comprehensive legislation in the Senate to do that, and as president, I will fight to make that happen.
Governor O'Malley, 30. Charleston, Andrea Mitchell has questions now for the candidates, starting with Iran.
Thank you, Lester. Senator Sanders, the nuclear deal is now in force. Iran is getting its billions of dollars. Several Americans who had been held are now going to be heading home. The president said today it's a good day for diplomacy. Is it time now to restore diplomatic relations for the first time since 1979 and actually reopen a U.S. embassy in Tehran?
I think what we have got to do is move as aggressively as we can to normalize relations with Iran, understanding that Iran's behavior in so many ways is something that we disagree with. Their support for terrorism, the anti-American rhetoric that we're hearing from some of their leadership is something that is not acceptable. On the other hand, the fact that we managed to reach an agreement, something that I very strongly supported, that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and that we did that without going to war, and that I believe we're seeing a thaw in our relationships with Iran is a very positive step. So if your question is, do I want to see that relationship become more positive in the future? Yes. Can I tell you that we should open an embassy in Tehran tomorrow? No, I don't think we should. But I think the goal has got to be, as we have done with Cuba, to move and warm relations with a very powerful and important country in this world.
Your response, Sanders, ground forces, yes or no?
As everybody here knows, this is an incredibly complicated and difficult issue, and I applaud. I know President Obama has been getting a lot of criticism on this. I think he is doing the right thing. What the nightmare is, which many of my Republican colleagues appear to want, is to not have learned the lesson of Iraq, to get American young men and women involved in perpetual warfare in the quagmire of Syria and the Middle East would be an unmitigated disaster that, as president, I will do everything in my power to avoid.
Andrea, 30.
We should learn from King Abdullah of Jordan, one of the few heroes in a very unheroic place. And what Abdullah said is this is a war for the soul of Islam, and that Muslim troops should be on the ground with our support and the support of other major countries. That is how we destroy ISIS, not with American troops in perpetual warfare.
Governor O'Malley, I have a question for Senator Sanders. Did the policies of the Obama administration, in which Secretary Clinton, of course, was a part, create a vacuum in Iraq and Syria that helped ISIS grow?
No, I think the vacuum was created by the disastrous war in Iraq, which I vigorously opposed. Not only did I vote against it, I helped lead the opposition. And what happened there is, yeah, it's easy to get rid of a two-bit dictator like Saddam Hussein, but there wasn't the kind of thought as to what happens the day after you get him and what kind of political vacuum occurs and who rises up. Groups like ISIS. So I think that President Obama made a promise to the American people when he ran. And he said, you know what, I'm going to do my best to bring American troops home. And I supported what he did. Our job is to train and provide military support for Muslim countries in the area who are prepared to take on ISIS. And one point I want to make here that is not made very often. You have incredibly wealthy countries in that region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Qatar. Qatar happens to be the largest, wealthiest country per capita in the world. They have got to start putting in some skin in the game and not just ask the United States to do it. Let me just suggest where Secretary Clinton and I think, I agree with most of what she said, but where I think we do have an honest disagreement is that in the incredible quagmire of Syria, where it's hard to know who's fighting who, and if you give arms to this guy, it may end up in ISIS's hands the next day. We all know that. And we all know, no argument, the Secretary is absolutely right. Assad is a butcher of his own people, man using chemical weapons against his own people. This is beyond disgusting. But I think in terms of our priorities in the region, our first priority must be the destruction of ISIS. Our second priority must be getting rid of Assad through some political settlement, working with Iran, working with Russia. But the immediate task is to bring all interests together who want to destroy ISIS, including Russia, including Iran, including our Muslim allies, to make that the major priority.
You have all talked about what you would do fighting ISIS over there, but we've been hit in this country by homegrown terrorists, from Chattanooga to San Bernardino, the recent shooting of a police officer in Philadelphia. How are you going to fight lone wolves here,
Senator Lester, Sanders? Year in and year out, I was the leader of the U.S.
Question, Senator Sanders. I wasn't clear. I apologize.
Okay. I just wanted to add, in the previous question, I voted against the USA Patriot Act for many of the reasons that Governor O'Malley mentioned. But it is not only the government that we have to worry about, it is private corporations. You would all be amazed, or maybe not, about the amount of information private companies and the government has in terms of the websites that you access, the products that you buy, where you are this very moment. And it is very clear to me that public policy has not caught up with the explosion of technology. So, yes, we have to work with Silicon Valley to make sure that we do not allow ISIS to transmit information.
But in terms of lone wolves, the threat, how would you do it?
What we have got to do there is, among other things, as I was just saying, have Silicon Valley help us to make sure that information being transmitted through the Internet or in other ways by ISIS is, in fact, discovered. But I do believe we can do that without violating the constitutional and privacy rights of the American people.
We have to go. "30 seconds, Senator."
Okay. And I agree with what the Secretary said and what Governor O'Malley said. But here's an issue that we also should talk about. We have a $600 billion military budget. It is a budget larger than the next 8 countries. Unfortunately, much of that budget continues to fight the old Cold War with the Soviet Union. Very little of that budget, less than 10%, actually goes into fighting ISIS and international terrorism. We need to be thinking hard about making fundamental changes in the priorities of the Defense Department.
All right. I can respond, sir.
Great ideas from Governor O'Malley, Secretary Clinton. But here's the truth. If you have an administration stacked with Wall Street appointees, you ain't going to accomplish very much. So here's a promise that I make. And I mentioned a moment ago how corrupt the system is. Goldman Sachs, paying a $5 billion fine, gives this country in recent history a Republican Secretary of Treasury, a Democratic Secretary of Treasury. Here's a promise. If elected president, Goldman Sachs is not going to bring forth a Secretary of Treasury for a Sanders administration.
Senator Sanders, let me ask you a question. You called Bill Clinton's past transgressions, quote, totally disgraceful and unacceptable. Senator, do you regret saying that?
I was asked a question. You know, one of the things, Andrea, and that question annoys me. I cannot walk down the street, Secretary Clinton knows this, without being told how much I have to attack Secretary Clinton. Want to get me on the front pages of the paper, I make some vicious attack. I have avoided doing that, trying to run an issue-oriented campaign. I was asked a question.
You didn't have to answer it that way, though.
Well,
why did you?
Then if I don't answer it, then there's another front page story. Yes. And I mean this seriously. You know that. We've been through this. Yes, his behavior was deplorable. Have I ever once said a word about that issue? No, I have not. I'm going to debate Secretary Clinton and Governor O'Malley on the issues facing the American people, not Bill Clinton's personal behavior.
Senator Sanders.
What Secretary Clinton was right, and what I did, which I think is also right, is demanded the resignation of the governor. A man who acts that irresponsibly should not stay in power. Now, we are a great nation, and we've heard a lot of great ideas here tonight. But let's be honest and let's be truthful. Very little is going to be done to transform our economy and to create the kind of middle class we need unless we end a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. We have got to get rid of super PACs. We have got to get rid of Citizens United. And what we have got to do is create a political revolution which revitalizes American democracy, which brings millions of young people and working people into the political process to say loudly and clearly that the government of the United States of America belongs to all of us and not just a handful of wealthy campaign contributors.
All right. Well, thank you.